Und damit herzlich willkommen zu einem neuen Video zum Thema Elden Ring. Heute, jetzt wo wir das Spiel durchgespielt haben, sogar mit dem optionalen Boss Malenia, haben wir ebenfalls gelegt, schauen wir uns mal jetzt diese ganzen Spoiler an, die ich mir die ganze Zeit nicht angetan habe, aus taktischen Gründen, weil ich halt diesen Blind Run gefühlt habe. Aber jetzt möchte ich mir gerne einmal angucken, wer ist Let Me Solo Höher, was ist das mit diesem Tanzpad auf sich, worum geht es in der Story von Elden Ring, was für Enden gibt es. Ich habe nämlich keine Ahnung, was das alles bedeutet hat. Ich habe keine Ahnung, wie mein Ende jetzt zustande gekommen ist. Und das werden wir jetzt hier herausfinden gemeinsam. Also direkt rein da. Ich habe jetzt hier ein paar Videos bekommen. Ja, hier zum Beispiel steht von Kiso, der hat das gestern eingeschickt, Watchfire, Elden Ring is just a video game. Weiß jetzt nicht, was das für ein Video ist. Ich habe hier von Berg bekommen, guck auf seinen Channel, der hat eine Playlist über die Lore, würde das erste Video angucken, 30 Minuten und den Rest lieber alleine, da es sonst zu lang ist. Aber er ist halt mit der mit Abstand Beste in der Lore-Szene, Goat Fatih. Sonic schickt hier uns ein Video rein von Gingy, Elden Ring Story und Endings Explained. Wenn du das Video schaust, weißt du alles über die Story plus Endings. Haben noch einen Short hier, Let Me Solo Her, The Story of ihm. Was würdet ihr sagen? Welches von den Videos sollen wir angucken? Also ich würde erstmal gerne die Story erstmal erfahren. Und da brauchen wir nicht mehrere angucken. Also schauen wir uns einmal das hier von Berg an oder das hier von Sonic an. Was würdet ihr sagen? Ich würde dementsprechend das kürzere nehmen. Halbe Stunde hier. Sweet Dreams. Ich werde darauf nicht eingehen, aber die Zuschauer vielleicht, falls dann noch irgendwas übrig bleiben sollte, offen bleiben sollte, können wir gerne morgen über Video weiterreden. Ich würde mir gerne jetzt komplett mich darauf konzentrieren.
Our story doesn't begin.
Our story doesn't begin in the lands between. Okay, also im Zwischenland beginnt die Story nicht. Auch an dieser Stelle auch Achtung, Spoilerwarnung, falls ihr es noch nicht durchgespielt habt und euch nicht davon spoilern lassen möchtet, dann solltet ihr vielleicht jetzt abschalten und euch das Video zu einem späteren Zeitpunkt angucken. Ich werde das hier auch nicht 1:1 übersetzen. Ich gehe davon aus, dass ihr Englisch könnt und falls nicht, dann kommt gerne in den Stream. Fragt mich nochmal direkt. Ich werde es euch dann irgendwie im Nachhinein mit eigenen Worten erklären.
In the lands between. It begins in the cosmos, far away, with an...
Die Story beginnt im Kosmos? Ich glaube, da zielen sie auf das ab, was Radagon gemacht hat. Ne? Radagon hat ja irgendwie die neue Zeitära versucht zu verhindern. Und solange Radagon gelebt hat, konnte das neue Zeitalter nicht beginnen, weil er ja irgendwas davor aufgehalten hat, dass es auf die Erde fliegt. Dieser Komet, der dann dieses Loch zu Nokron geöffnet hatte, glaube ich.
Outer god called the Greater Will. There are a lot of outer gods mentioned in Elden Ring. You can think of these kind of like the great ones of Bloodborne. They're distant beings, they're all-powerful and they're quite unknowable by design. But many...
Das Ding hatte uns ja immer Dings gemacht, Wahnsinn. Das war dieser Turm, wo ich mich erstmal nicht reingetraut hatte. Und jetzt, wo ich dann mein Ende gesehen habe, ich habe ja das Ende gehabt, wo ich diese 3 Finger um mich herum hatte und dieses Frenzied Fire oder so, Ending hieß es ja, da hatte ich auch so einen Kopf, so einen Sonnenkopf, wie das Ding hier.
Many of these outer gods want to make their presence felt in the world. The Greater Will, maybe most of all. To this end, it sent a golden star hurtling towards the lands between. The Elden Star's incantation tells us that this golden star was bearing a beast, an Elden beast. The Elden Remembrance calls it a vassal beast of the Greater Will. If you didn't know, a vassal is someone who holds land on behalf of their overlord. Obviously, this is fitting in this case, because the Elden Beast occupied the lands between on behalf of the Greater Will, and was a living incarnation of the concept of order. As such, this beast would later become the Elden Ring. The Elden Ring itself is made up of runes of power, some great, some small, that together represent a sort of logic for the world to follow. Thus, the Elden Ring represents order. The true nature of this order is a subject of constant debate and research undergone by fundamentalists. But 2 of the key fundamentals are the laws of causality and regression. You can think of the law of causality as cause and effect, where actions have consequences, and those consequences are new causes that branch out into infinity. These are the relationships between things. Then there's the law of regression that states that all things eternally yearn to converge and return to their roots. Fittingly, then, the Elden Ring is housed within the Erdtree. which towers over the lands between. But it's very important to stress that life in the lands between did not begin with the Erdtree, the Elden Ring, or the Elden Beast. No, the lands between were occupied well before the Greater Will came. There were other beings here. There were other factions here. There were other gods here. And there was even another great tree here before the Erdtree. And this is where a huge twist regarding the Erdtree comes in. So
Moment. Ich möchte das nochmal mit den Runen genau verstehen.
in this case, because the Elden Beast occupied the lands between on behalf of the Greater Will and was a living incarnation of the concept of order, of their own.
Das mit den Golden Stars hier, der Elden Beast.
Maybe most of all. To this end, it sent a golden star hurtling towards the lands between. The Elden Star's incantation tells us that this golden star was bearing a beast, an Elden Beast. The Elden Remembrance calls it a vassal beast of the Greater Will. If you didn't know, a vassal is someone who holds land on behalf of their overlord. Obviously, this is fitting in this case, because the Elden Beast occupied the lands between on behalf of the Greater Will and was a living incarnation of the concept of order. As such, this beast would later become the Elden Ring. The Elden Ring itself is made up of runes of power, some great, some small.
Den Satz, the Elden Ring itself is made up of runes of power.
The ring itself is made up of runes of power, some great, some small, that together represent a sort of logic for the world to follow. Thus, the Elden
Sehr abstrakt und ich kann es nicht wirklich greifen. Also den Part verstehe ich jetzt trotz dessen nicht, aber ist okay, wir gucken mal weiter.
And there was even another great tree here before the Erdtree.
Die Runen geben die Gesetze der Welt vor. Okay, ja.
And this is where a huge twist regarding the Erdtree comes in. So, there are incantations in the game called aspects of the Crucible. According to their descriptions, these are manifestations of the Erdtree's primal vital energies. And I quote, "They are an aspect of the primordial crucible where all life was once blended together." But how could all life be blended together in the Erdtree if the Erdtree appeared after life existed? Well, there can only be one answer, right? That the Erdtree is a parasite, and it took over a tree that existed here before. This ancient tree was called the Great Tree. So the Great Tree was...
Okay, also der Erdtree strahlt das Licht aller Lebewesen in dieser Welt aus. Und der Erdtree wird als Parasit angesehen, der diesen alten Great Tree übernommen hat.
almost certainly the location of this primordial crucible, and it must have been a very powerful primordial force for the Greater Will to have commandeered. It might even be the reason the Lands Between is important to the Greater Will in the first place. It also explains why spells and enemies related to the Great Tree's crucible would eventually be looked down upon. For example, the Knot Talisman is fashioned from a knotted vestige of the Crucible, and it was considered a signifier of the divine in ancient times, but is now increasingly disdained as an impurity as civilization has advanced. Enemies related to the Crucible are the Omen, the Misbegotten, and the Crucible Knights, and all three of them would be shunned, enslaved, or imprisoned. Those who speak for the Erdtree don't want you to know its roots, so to speak. According to the spell, Protection of the Erdtree, in the beginning everything was in opposition to the Erdtree, but through countless victories in war, it became the embodiment of order.
In Marika's own words, the Erdtree governs all. The choice is thine. Become one with the order, or...
Also es gab auch noch Lebewesen vor dem Erdtree, und aber der Erdtree hat halt so ein bisschen, sag ich mal, alles übernommen und dieses neue Leben geschafft. Und die Lebewesen, die es davor schon gab, das waren diese drei Fraktionen, die da eben gerade gezeigt wurden. Diese Crucible, diese Schmelztiegelritter, diese fetten Dinger mit dem Schwert und diese kleinen Gargoyles mit den zwei Schwertern.
or divest thyself of it, to wallow at the fringes, a powerless upstart.
But the Greater Will needed more than a big tree. It needed loyal agents in the lands between. To this end, it has the Two Fingers, who are its envoys. The Two Fingers heirloom has a weird picture of them, but it reads, "Of course, fingers cannot speak, yet these are eloquent. Persistently they wriggle, spelling out mysteries in the air. Thus did we gain the words of our faith." These words are interpreted by the finger readers. These are the undying old crones that you would have found throughout the lands between. They pass down the wisdom of the Two Fingers, or at least they used to.
Your fingers, please, your fingers. I can read them.
Most of them appear to have lost their purpose, and they're desperate to read your fingers and tell you annoying riddles, since their two fingers are likely dead. And yes, of course, there are multiple sets of Two Fingers. You would have found their corpses on the tops of the divine towers. Atop these towers, you loot the fingers in order to activate the true power of a great rune. Specifically though, you
Stimmt, jetzt wo ich das sehe, erinnere ich mich auch daran, dass da die zwei Finger waren.
are giving benediction back to your great rune. You're taking a blessing back from the two dead fingers, essentially. This is just one of many blessings that the Two Fingers can bestow, and my point is kind of that the Two Fingers clearly have more than just influence. They have real power on some level. The Greater Will needs these powerful envoys and agents because, while it's obviously incredibly powerful, it does seem limited by a few things. First is space. The Greater Will didn't come to the lands between itself, it sent an elden beast to do its bidding instead. Second is time.
Also der Greater Will, der vor all dem schon da war, der im Kosmos schon beginnt, hat hier diesen Elden Beast losgeschickt als sein Lakaien, als sein Vasall, der quasi so ein bisschen die Sachen übernimmt. Sein Stellvertreter auf dieser Welt in dem Zwischenland. Greater Will ist ein Gott, ja, genau. Und es gibt also verschiedene Götter. Und Greater Will ist halt einer von den größeren Göttern, die quasi das verursacht haben, was hier losgeht.
There is a moment later in the game where your pair of Two Fingers go still because they're forced to commune with the Greater Will for guidance.
When they are finished, the fingers will again offer their guidance. But thousands, if not tens of thousands, of moons must first pass. No matter for me. But you, how will you ever manage the wait?
So the Greater Will needs a physical manifestation of order. It needs envoys to convey its will, but what it also needs is a god. Introducing Marika the Eternal. I have this utterly enormous mind map of Elden Ring's lore, and there's a reason
Halt doch die Fresse, Bro!
she's at this utterly enormous mind
Marika, wieso ist sie da? Moment.
needs envoys to convey its will, but what it also needs is a god. Introducing Marika the Eternal. I have this utterly enormous mind map of Elden Ring's lore, and there's a reason she's at the center. She's essentially the equivalent of Gwyn from Dark Souls, except unlike Gwyn, Marika didn't just crawl out of the dark and find power. To an extent, it seems like she earned it. We don't know much about her origins, except that she is of the Numen race, which is actually an origin that you can choose in the character selection screen. Numen come from outside the lands between, and are supposed descendants of denizens of another world, long-lived but seldom born. At some point, Marika was chosen as an Empyrean. What is an Empyrean? Well, an Empyrean is a being chosen by the Fingers as a candidate for godhood. As an Empyrean, Marika received the aid of a shadow to do her bidding. So what is a shadow? Well, it's a wolf, shadowbound to its Empyrean by the Two Fingers. Lunar Princess Rani is another example of an Empyrean with a shadowbound beast. You would have met Blythe. These creatures are the Empyrean's very own shadow. They are completely loyal to their needs and, by definition, incapable of treachery. Marika's shadow was a beast called Malakath. Every Empyrean uses their shadow in different ways, but Marika's sole need of her shadow was as a vessel to lock away destined death. So what is destined death? Well, according to Enya, it's the rune of death.
The rune of death goes by 2 names. The other is destined death.
We mentioned earlier that the Elden Ring is made up of runes, and at some point, maybe when she was chosen as a god, Marika plucked the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring. She gave the Rune of Death to Malekith, her totally loyal shadow, who bore a black blade imbued with this rune. It's kind
Okay, also es gibt den Greater Will, der direkt unter ihm geordnete, ja, von der Hierarchie ist das Elden Beast. Der sagt immer Envoys. Was heißt Envoys erstmal? Was ist die Übersetzung von Englisch auf Deutsch? Envoy. Was heißt Envoy? Was ist Envoy auf Deutsch, Leute? E-N-V-O-Y. Hallo Macwin, moin. Gesandter, okay. Und die Finger ist der Gesandte von dem Greater Will / Elden Beast. Und die wiederum brauchten ein Gottsymbol. Und da haben sie Marika auserwählt. Sie hat dann diesen Shadow, Bless of Shadow bekommen. Also so irgendwie so eine Segnung. Und die wiederum hat einen, wie haben sie es genannt? N-Race oder so auserwählt. Also den nächsten Untergeordneten. Einer dieser Untergeordneten ist jetzt, also die Finger haben jetzt Marika gewählt. Und da ist zum Beispiel Marikas, und die haben halt einen Begleiter, einen Shadow Wolf. Und das ist jetzt im Falle von Marika Malekith. Das ist er hier. Und im Falle von Rani ist es Blade. Und es gibt sicherlich noch andere.
kind of genius, really. In a single
Empyrean, Dankeschön.
act, she removed the concept of death from the lands between, while also commanding total control of death through her shadow, who could deliver it at her whim. Now, some of you might be asking, if death is removed from the lands between, how come I can kill this dog? First off, shame on you. Second, from a lore point of view, that dog isn't really dead. It's simply in the process of its spirit, or its soul, returning to the Erdtree. Catacomb dungeons, for example, are specifically constructed near the roots of the Great Tree for this reason, so that the Erdtree can reabsorb their ashes back into it. This process replaced the concept of a death that you were destined to have, but this random spirit outside of a catacomb dungeon says it best. As another example of this theory, when you kill a major boss, you receive a remembrance of them. These are spirits, and they are hewn into the Erdtree. In this way, thanks to the Erdtree's grace, their spirits are immortalized, in a sense. This new form of death also explains what's happening when you summon spirits
from ash and return to the Erdtree.
However, some spirits never return to the Erdtree, and they rise within death as corpses or skeletons instead. So this was the new order, and it's important to stress that it was in this
Das ist auch das, was der Pestbollen-Charakter gemacht hat. Er hat die Leichen quasi so geschändet, dass sie nicht zum Erdenbaum zurück konnten, sondern als Leichen quasi gewandelt sind, weil er sie geschändet hat.
moment when the rune of death was removed, when destined death was taken, this is when order became the golden order.
The forbidden shadow plucked from the golden order upon its creation.
Specifically, this was Marika's golden order. So not only did she become a god and a vessel for the Elden Ring, she became renowned as Marika the... Specifically, this was Marika's golden order. So not only did she become a god and a vessel for the Elden Ring, she became renowned as Marika,
Was ist Vessel?
the Eternal, for her removal of destined death. It was a huge part of her character and her reign
Gefäß, okay.
as well. However, Marika had more than just death to conquer. She had wars to fight, as the world was occupied by many forces that could threaten her Golden Order. There was war with the Storm Lord, who likely ruled over Stormvale, and there was a war with the Giants, who were masters of a flame that could burn the Erdtree. There was war with the ancient dragons, who incidentally had stones that could twist time and thus slay a god. And finally, there was war brewing with the Carrion royalty, who had previously obeyed laws which contravened the Golden Order. Thus, sort of similar to how the Greater Will needed an Empyrean to enforce its will, Marika herself needed someone to wage war. So, there was to be a husband, a consort, an Elden Lord. The man chosen was Hoarah, a ferocious warrior who became known as the Lord of the Battlefield. His crown was warranted with strength, and while it was for this strength that Marika married him, he was also required to take a vow to conduct himself as a lord. To suppress the ceaseless lust for battle that raged within, Hoarah took the beast regent Sarosh upon his back. You'll notice this is another example of a beast being given for the purpose of serving order. Thus, in this moment, he went from being Hoarah, warrior, to Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, consort to Queen Marika, and a certified demigod. Godfrey and Marika had 3 demigod children together. There was
Boah, jetzt haftig, ey. Okay. Also Marika und Godfrey haben geheiratet, Liebe gemacht und die haben Kinder gezeugt. Wie die Türken. Und ne, jetzt ist es spannend.
Godfrey and Marika had 3 demigod children.
Die hatten. Weil Hoarah Lux, also der Godfrey dann hieß, ist ja Mensch so gesehen, also keiner Mensch. Marika ist ja Gott, also haben sie jetzt Kinder gezeugt und das sind Halbgötter, wie Herkules in der Mythologie.
Together.
Küblo hafta sonu yapak. Mümkünse. Çok özür dilerim ama hafta sonu yapak. Kurban olayım.
There was Godwyn the Golden.
Godwyn the Golden. Godwyn the Golden, okay.
Who you saw being killed in the opening trailer. And
das ist Godwyn, der da diesen Dolch in seinem Rücken hat. Wie meine Community manchmal mir den Dolch in den Rücken rammt, okay.
there were also the reviled Omen twins, Morgoth, who guards the Erdtree, and Mohg, who became...
Morgoth und Mohg sind Geschwister. Und Godwyn, ja, Godwyn habe ich nie gesehen. Den habe ich nie gesehen, ne? Godwyn haben wir nie gesehen, oder? Okay, also das sind die drei halbgöttischen Brüder. Godwyn, der den Dolch in den Rücken gefressen hat. Morgoth, das ist der den Erdtree beschützt hat. Und Mohg, der hässliche, den ich da oben noch optional besiegt habe.
Lord of Blood.
Aber es gab jetzt zwei Mohgs. Einmal Mohg, Mal des Gottes oder sowas und dann den Mohg da oben in diesem komischen griechischen Bauten.
You might think that Godric was another demigod child, but he actually wasn't. Instead, he was probably descended from Godwyn.
Ich habe immer nämlich gedacht, dass Morgoth, Godric hier und Margaret Geschwister wären, weil die so ähnlich aussehen, so hässlich, aber okay.
Anyway, we'll talk about the demigods more in detail in another video, so subscribe.
Godric ist kein Sohn von Marika und Godfrey.
Subscribe for that. But for now, just know that Godfrey and his offspring were the first demigods, henceforth known as the Golden Lineage. In his wars, Godfrey led his 16 Crucible Knights into battle, who were named so for they fought with the primordial powers of the Erdtree. Their incantations were aspects of the Crucible itself, and they likely fought giants, dragons, the Stormlord, and more to usher in their age, the age of the Erdtree.
In Marika's own words, "Hark, brave warriors. Hark, my lord Godfrey. we commend your deeds. Guidance hath delivered ye through each ordeal to the place ye stand. Put the giants to the sword and confine the flame atop the mount. Let a new epoch begin, an epoch glistening with life. Brandish the Elden Ring for the age of the Erdtree.
The Erdtree would go on to be largely seen as a blessing for all of those in the lands between, especially those close to it in Leyndell, the capital city of the Erdtree. The tree, especially those close to it in Leyndell, as a blessing for all of those in the land. The Erdtree would go on to be largely seen as a blessing for all of those in the lands between, especially those close to it in Leyndell, the capital city of.
Also der Erdtree wurde als Segen angesehen von einigen Leuten.
The Erdtree would go on to be largely seen as a blessing for all of those in the lands between, especially those close to it in Leyndell, the capital city of the Erdtree. The tree bestowed blessings. For example, the dew that dropped from its branches were like jewels. It loomed overhead as a constant reminder of order, and its roots reached far and wide, relieving many of the burden of death. In fact, Erdtree burial was one of the highest honors a hero could receive. One by one, the previous factions of the world fell. The giants were put to the sword, and their fell.
Minox, vielen Dank für den Release am 11. Monat. Danke dir vielmals für den Support. Salam. Moin.
God was killed by Marika herself.
Sieht doch aus wie du. What do you mean? Achso, weil ich so hässlich bin. Ah, verstehe. Danke, Bro. Tam, ich werde dich jetzt mal nicht zerstören, weil du gerade reingesubbt hast. Ist okay. Ne? Du willst nicht wissen, was ich mit dir gemacht hätte, wenn du nicht reingesubbt hättest jetzt.
The ancient dragons to the sword. One by one, the previous factions of the world fell. The giants were put to the sword, and their fell god was killed by Marika herself. The ancient dragons broke down the walls of Leyndell, but met fierce retaliation. However, I think the House of the Erdtree encountered the most trouble against the land to their southwest, Leonia. Here, the House of the Moon repelled their offensives time and time again, and I mean that literally, because there was not just one but two wars fought here, and in both of these, there was no victory for the Golden nor for the Moon. And I suspect it was probably because of these lobsters. These damn things can snipe you from like a mile away, and it's bullshit. Actually, it was probably because of the Carrier Knights, who, according to their weapons, were able to wield sorcerous battle skills, and despite numbering fewer than 20, this power made them a match for even the champions of gold in battle. These enchanted knights were anointed by the Lunar Queen, a young astrologer.
Okay, ich muss sagen, die Story ist scary. Also die Story ist wirklich extrem verwirrend. Und es gibt extrem viele Zusammenhänge. Und ich bezweifle, dass ich alles richtig verstehen werde, selbst nach dem Video. Aber es gibt mir auf jeden Fall ein gutes Gefühl, ansatzweise zu verstehen, was da so abgeht.
Who went on to establish the House of Caria as royalty in this land. With her bewitching lunar magic, she won over the Academy of Raya Lucaria, where glintstone sorcery was studied, and united the Carian royal family and the learned scholars of Raya Lucaria defended their home from the golden aggressors. At the head of this great golden army was Radagon.
Lord Radagon was a great champion, possessed of flowing red locks. He came to these lands at the head of a great golden host when he met Lady Renala in battle.
These two champions clashed, fell in love, and joined their houses.
Radagon once cleansed himself with celestial dew, repented his territorial aggressions, and swore his love to Renala. The order of the Erdtree and the fate of the moon were conjoined, and all the wounds of war forgiven.
You might think it strange that the Greater Will would permit this union, but it's not too odd, all things considered. As with most From Software games, sorcery and faith are just two sides of the same coin, and both of these powers stem from the cosmos. Radagon and Renala were known to have 3 children together. Lunar Princess Rani, who inherited her
Rani ist die Tochter von Renala und Radagon.
The mother's propensity for lunar magic. Radan, who took after
Radan ist auch ein Sohn von Radagon und Renala. Wie kam dieser Öküs aus der Scheide von Renala raus? Tamam, Renala war groß und so, aber Digga, Bruder, der Typ ist, der kann fliegen. Sein Pferd hat nicht mal ihn getragen am Ende.
his father Radagon and would go on to master gravitational magic, and Rykard.
Nein, Joch am Räumen. Jetzt übertreiben die richtig. Rikard mit Schlange. Einfach Schlange aus Scheide. Der wurde wahrscheinlich zur Schlange irgendwann. Der hat wahrscheinlich irgendwann das Leben einer Schlange gewählt.
Who pioneered new hex sorceries and would go on to feed himself to a great serpent.
Ja, dachte
It
ich auch.
follows that at some point after this, Marika began to harbor doubts. Doubts about the Golden Order that she had had a hand in creating.
In Marika's own words, I declare mine intent to search the depths of the Golden Order through understanding of the proper way. Our faith, our grace is increased. Those blissful early days of blind belief are long past. My comrades, why must ye falter?
And it's at this point that we should talk about Marika's motivations, her character. This is surely going to be one of those huge points of debate in the coming years, but for now, my working theory is that she wanted to discover the truth behind order and the truth behind the greater will, and she believed that bonds had to be broken so that they could be better understood. She believed that there was great meaning to be found in hardship.
Queen Marika has high hopes for us, that we continue to struggle, unto eternity.
For Lord Godfrey, his struggle ended at the end of his campaigns. According to his armor, he led the war against the giants, faced the Storm Lord alone, and then there came a moment when his last worthy enemy fell, and it was then, as the story is told, that the hue of Lord Godfrey's eyes faded. In truth, he was robbed of his grace. Then Marika sent him away.
My lord, and thy warriors, I divest each of thee of thy grace. With thine eyes dimmed, ye will be driven from the lands between. Ye will wage war in a land afar, where ye will live and die.
This became known as the Long March of the Tarnished, as Godfrey and his tarnished descendants walked away from the lands between. But Queen Marika absolutely had a plan here, that Lord Godfrey and his descendants would one day return stronger, having struggled outside of grace.
Then, after thy death, I will give back what I once claimed, return to the lands between, wage war, and brandish the Elden Ring, grow strong in the face of death. Warriors of my lord, Lord Godfrey.
Soon after, she found a new husband. Either that or a new husband was found for her.
Was für eine Bitch, Digga. Schickt Godfrey ins Exil und schnappt sich den nächsten Hengst.
When Godfrey, first Elden Lord, was hounded from the lands between, Radagon left Renala to return to the Erdtree capital, becoming Queen Marika's second husband.
Okay, Radagon ist dann der neue Hengst von Marika.
And king consort, taking the title of second Elden Lord. The mystery endures to this day as to why Lord Radagon would cast Lady Renala aside, and moreover, why a mere champion would be chosen for the seat of Elden Lord.
Whatever the case, as a part of this union, Radagon's prior 3 children with Renala became demigod stepchildren, granted grace thanks to their new family tree. Renala was broken by this, and so was her country, Leonia. The Queen's set reads, when Renala, head of both the Academy of Raya Lucaria and the Carian royal family, lost her husband Radagon, Her heart went along with him, and then those at the academy realized that Renala was no champion after all. In the wake of Radagon's betrayal and Renala's poor judgment, Leonia struggled with civil war, with the Academy of Raya Lucaria on one side and the Carrion Royals.
Heftig. Okay, also das Ding ist, Renala wurde dann quasi so gesehen betrogen von Radagon, weil Radagon keinen Bock mehr auf Renala hatte und ist quasi dann zu Marika.
On the other. And it's here, during the age of the Erdtree, that Lunar Princess Rani, daughter of Renala and Radagon, stole a fragment of the Rune of Death.
It happened during the golden age of the Erdtree, long before the shattering of the Elden Ring. During
Radagon stole a fragment of the Rune of Death. Daughter, and it's here, during
Leute, during the age, okay, also jetzt, das wird nochmal interessant.
one side and the Carrion Royals on the other. And it's here, during the age of the Erdtree, that Lunar Princess Rani, daughter of Renala and Radagon, stole a fragment of the Rune of Death.
Rani hat eine Rune, ein Fragment der Rune des Todes gestohlen.
During the age of the Erdtree, that Lunar Princess Rani, daughter of Renala and Radagon, stole a fragment of the Rune of Death.
It happened during the golden age of the Erdtree, long before the shattering of the Elden Ring. Someone stole a fragment of the Rune of Death from Malekith, the Black Blade.
As mentioned previously, Malekith was Marika's shadow, and he had sealed destined death in a black blade. Then a fragment, only a fragment, of this Rune of Death was stolen. And once this happened, Malekith went a step further in protecting destined death. He bound the blade within his own flesh, such that none might rob death ever again. It was too late, however. This fragment of the Rune of Death was used immediately, that night, to kill a demigod. And of the Rune of rob death ever again.
Hat den Rest der Rune des Todes in sein eigenes Fleisch eingebrannt, damit nie wieder irgendjemand ein Fragment klauen konnte davon. Aber dieses Fragment war jetzt bei Rani.
Again. It was too late, however. This fragment of the Rune of Death was used immediately, that night, to kill a demigod, Marika's own son, Godwyn the Golden.
That was the first recorded death of a demigod in all history, and it became the catalyst. Soon, the Elden Ring was smashed, and thus sprang forth the war known as the Shattering.
Now, there is a lot of really credible evidence that Marika was behind this plot to have a fragment of the Rune of Death stolen. There's also a ton of evidence that Marika is behind the entirety of your Tarnished quest, but we'll talk about that in another video. For now, all you really need to know, in terms of the timeline...
Also habe ich das richtig verstanden? Marika, also es gibt sehr viele Beweise, dass Marika hinter all dem steckte, dass Rani das Fragment geklaut hat und damit auch schuld an dem Tod ihres eigenen Sohnes Godwyn ist?
Plot to have a fragment of the credible evidence that Marika was behind this plot to have a fragment of the Rune of Death stolen.
Wieso will sie unbedingt ihren eigenen Sohn töten?
Ton of evidence that Marika is behind the entirety of your Tarnished quest, but we'll talk about that in another video. For now, all you really need to know, in terms of the timeline at least, is this. After the marriage of
Ja, Marika steckt dahinter, sie will den Outer-Gott loswerden.
Marika and Radagon, and after...
Du meinst Greater Will, Broly? Sie hat immer an den Greater Will geglaubt, sie hatte jedoch Zweifel mit der Zeit.
Is this. After the marriage of Marika and Radagon, and after a fragment of the Rune of Death was stolen, Marika went on to shatter the Elden Ring, and Radagon...
Marika went on to shatter the Elden Ring, and Radagon attempted to repair it. To no avail. The Elden Ring had been broken into runes, some great, to no avail. The Elden Ring had been broken into runes, some... Das ist echt kompliziert.
Of Marika and Radagon, and after a fragment of the Rune of Death was stolen, Marika
went on, also Marika hat den Elden Ring zerstört und Radagon, ihr neuer Mann, hat versucht, es zu
It
reparieren.
went on to shatter the Elden
Aber es
Ring,
war zu spät.
and Radagon attempted to repair it, to no avail. The Elden Ring had been broken into runes, some great and some small.
You know, it's said that Lord Radagon harbored a secret. A famed sculptor of the Erdtree capital was once summoned to render Lord Radagon's likeness in giant stature, when he glimpsed the skeleton in Radagon's closet. And as such, it's said the great statue harbors his secret too.
Of course, the huge twist in Elden Ring is that Radagon is Marika, or
Was? Marika ist Radagon? Also Marika hat keinen Mumu, sondern einen Schwanz? Oder beides gleichzeitig?
twist in Elden Ring is that Radagon is Marika, or depending on what you believe, he became her, for she knew it was going to happen.
In Marika's own words,
Radagon wurde zu Marika.
O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered, both. Mine other self.
You can tell when From Software is keeping something a little bit open-ended, and of everything in Elden Ring's lore, this will also go on to be one of the biggest unknowns as we move forward. For example, the wording, "Thou art yet to become me," reinforces that Marika and Radagon were two separate entities before the Shattering. However, in contrast, there is also evidence that Radagon was always part of Marika. For example, Enya says that
The demigods are each and all the direct offspring of Queen Marika.
but how can this be if Radagon married Renala and had those demigod children?
Ja.
The only way that makes sense is if Radagon was always Marika and he just went over there to seduce Renala long ago. I'll present
Was heißt Seduce? Was heißt Seduce? Hallo Pfeffi, grüß dich. Wir gucken uns gerade die Story an von Elden Ring. Was heißt Seduce? Verführen.
and he just
Okay.
went over there to seduce Renala.
Also, es gibt zwei Theorien. Entweder wurde Radagon irgendwann zu Marika oder Radagon war schon immer Marika gleichzeitig und hat hier in dem Falle versucht, einfach nur Renala zu verführen, um die Demigods zu gebären.
Long ago. I'll present more concrete theories in the future, but on this matter, the most important thing is, what do you think? While you can figure out a ton of Elden Ring's story, not all of it is open to interpretation. Certain things are, and this is one of them. And your interpretation is a big part of what makes this story special. At any rate, the union of Radagon and Marika seems to be a union of two fundamental opposing laws of the Golden Order. We mentioned these laws earlier, actually. There's the law of causality, and Marika is an agent of cause and effect. And there's the law of regression, as Radagon is a character who aspires to be complete and regress together. So I have a theory that forcing these two beings that represent these concepts together would have corrected Marika's deviance. But even so, she was imprisoned in the Erdtree for the crime of the Shattering.
Marika's trespass demanded a heavy sentence. But even in shackles, she remained.
Sie wurde also Marika wurde in den Erdtree gefangen genommen, weil sie den Elden Ring zerstört hatte.
A god and the vision's vessel.
The conjoined Radagon and Marika even had two demigod children of their own. Radagon and Marika even had two demigod children of their own, Miquella and Malenia.
Radagons und Marikas Kinder sind Miquella und Malenia.
These two children were born afflicted. Miquella was cursed with eternal.
Miquella und Malenia hatten eine Krankheit, als sie geboren sind. Miquella hatte einen Fluch, dass sie für immer und ewig jung bleibt, Kind bleibt.
Childhood, and Malenia harbored a horrific rot.
Und Malenia ist geboren mit dieser Scharlachfäulnis.
Within. Even so, these two children were both chosen as Empyrean.
Und die wiederum waren auch wieder Empyrean, so wie Rani und ich glaube Marika selbst auch. Marika ist ja auch ein Empyrean.
They were immensely sacred beings and eligible to inherit godhood from the Greater Will. Perhaps the Greater Will was just desperate to find a worthy successor. And indeed, in the Shattering War to come, many would try to claim the shards of the Elden Ring, and they would try to take the throne, including, of course, the Tarnished, who returned from their long march at long last, which we'll talk about in the next main lore video. I should probably also mention here that if you become a patron, you'll see upcoming lore videos early, as that's one of the rewards you get if you pledge to the $3 tier. And if you think my channel really adds a lot of value to the Souls games for you to the point where you pledge $20, then in this new tier you'll receive a new mug every 3 months that has a unique design on it, to do with the games by From Software. There are 4 to collect. The first one you'll get is inspired by Dark Souls, then Elden Ring, then Sekiro, and finally Bloodborne. And they all have fantastic art that I worked on with an amazing artist named Chu. But anyway, I figured this is the right place to end this video because the information here is going to be overwhelming. I bet it probably was too overwhelming, you know? It took me ages to commit these names and the relationships they had with other characters to memory, so I hope you guys are doing alright. One thing that helped me a lot was that we designed an enormous mind map with pretty much all of Elden Ring's lore, all of its item descriptions, all of its dialogues, all of the relationships between characters that we can think of. We added all of this together and it helped a ton in learning about the story and visualizing it all. And one day I will make this asset available to you all because I think after doing it, I think this is the quintessential way to piece together the story, and I think giving you guys this asset eventually will make that accessible for people, so I'm really excited about that. I want to thank Absa and Zard for accepting the paid task of helping me put all the...
Okay, super Video. Also super Video. Ich habe, ja, es war overwhelming. Es war auf jeden Fall overwhelming. Geisteskrank. Geisteskrank, Digga, dass er das alles zusammengefasst hat. Hat er irgendwo diese Mindmap angehangt? Nee, ne? Ich sehe hier, da ist auch eine Playlist, Elden Ring Demigods Explained. Ja, doch, ich gucke mir das auch auf jeden Fall noch an.